library is honored to sponsor, along with the Intercollegiate Department of Asian American Studies and a host of other campus partners, a series of events throughout April and May, commemorating the 50th anniversary of the Manzanar pilgrimage. An indefatigable team of faculty and library staff have organized 2 library exhibitions. In the exhibition gallery in the North Lobby here, just outside the Founders Room, is the exhibition titled Reclaiming Manzanar, Illegal Detention, Incarceration, and Contested Returns, which is organized by Pomona College professors Lynn Miyake and Sharon Goto, Pitzer College professor Todd Honma, and Special Collections Public Services librarian Ashley Larson, among others. This exhibition highlights original and historical materials from special collections, as well as items loaned by community members that document the historical events surrounding World War II Japanese American incarceration, focusing on Southern California. A second exhibition is located in the Asian Library on the 3rd floor of this building, titled No Dust Storms Can Sweep Them Away, Sue Kunitomi Embry, the Manzanar concentration camp, and the demand for social justice, which features documents, photographs, and other items from the Sue Kunitomi Embry papers and loaned by the Embry family. This exhibition was organized by Professor Miyake and the head of the Asian Library, Sui So. I'd like to say a special thank you to all who so generously loaned materials and helped with staging the 2 exhibitions. Both of these exhibitions are on view now through May 30th. All hours of the library building is open. Please spread the word, bring your friends and family to see both exhibitions throughout the end of May. Thank you so much. I would now like to welcome to the podium Pomona College Professor of Japanese, Lynn Miyake, who will introduce today's workshop on community storytelling and its facilitators.
Hello, my name is Lynn Miyake, and I teach in IDAAS, the Intercollegiate Department of Asian American Studies, and we are very delighted that all of you are here, and we hope that you will come to our other events as well. The next one will be Fostering Incarceration Allies, and it's a workshop next Friday, where we will learn how to go alongside those who have been detained, incarcerated, and profiled. And on the 18th, in this room, Monica Embry will discuss her grandmother's lifelong mission to institute the annual pilgrimage to Manzanar incarceration camp and and her work in establishing the camp as a national historic site. The following week, on April 7th, we embark on our old pilgrimage on a bus leaving from Pomona College. And I'm happy to say we have a bathroom on it too, and lots of food, and sign-ups are required, so there's information on how to do that, as well as our other events in the flyers on that table there. So we are very, very privileged today to have 3 facilitators, mainstays really in our Asian American community, and here to facilitate our workshop, we have Dr. Emily Anderson, one of our own actually, a Claremont McKenna alum from 2009.
99.
99.
10 years younger.
Yes. Oh, I know what it is. It's Christina.
She was 2000.
Oh,
Yeah.
oh, excuse me.
It's so long.
Actually, she looks so young. I think 2001 anyway, and she majored in literature and philosophy. She completed a PhD in Japanese history at UCLA and has taught at Occidental College, Washington State University, University of Auckland, and is now an independent scholar and curator who works with the Japanese American National Museum. She's presently curating an exhibition on boys and girl scouts in the incarceration camps. Our next presenter is Mary Uyematsu, and she was a student and community activist during the 1970s Asian American movement. And while at the UCLA Ethno-Communications program, she documented the movement through her photography. She also attended the second Manzanar pilgrimage at that time. For 30 years, she was the publications coordinator for the UCLA Asian American Center, retired, working on a book of her Asian American movement photographs. Martin Wong is a writer and editor with a BA in English from UCLA. He's also the co-founder of Save Music in Chinatown and Giant Robot magazine, which showcased in his words, and I quote, Asian movies, comics, toys, junk food, and other stuff that wasn't cool yet, end of quote. But this magazine actually developed into a full-color magazine with worldwide readership. Recently, he has started a DIY, I'm not quite sure how to pronounce that, matinees to support the Chinatown Elementary School, and he carries on the punk rock tradition in the neighborhood where now 3 generations of his family live and prosper in Chinatown. So without further ado, I turn things over to Emily, but before that, we should welcome her.
It's great to be back in Claremont, even though CMC has changed a lot since I graduated. So what we're going to do is I'm going to just, so there's a handout that's been circulating that we put together, and since this is a workshop about telling stories with objects, what I wanted to do is just introduce you to sort of strategies and ways of pulling stories out of objects. So that handout is meant as a guide, sort of just a primer for that. And I'm going to go through a couple of different examples and do this as a kind of a group activity. And then I'll turn things over to Mary and Martin. And then, we're going to have this is a workshop. So we'll just do very brief presentations and then try to spend the majority of our time with you practicing going through what it's like to, in a sense, kind of interview objects and find out what kind of stories they can tell. And there will definitely be plenty of time for questions and answers later on, so we're going to try to be fairly quick about our presentations. We want to spend most of the time with you, working together to see how objects can help tell stories about us and about themselves. So, just a quick thing, the sort of background image of this is just some random objects that are on the shelf, on one of the shelves and collections at the Japanese American National Museum. I'm going to start with just this. Oh, I need to turn that a little on. There we go. So, what I'm going to walk around because that's my lecture style. I hate standing in one place, which is why I have a remote. So, what I want to do is start with a series of photos from one collection. I want to start with this one. So, I think this is a pretty striking image. So, let me start with this question. When do you think this is from? Any guesses? 1930s. 1930s? Okay, any other? 1920s? 1920s, 1930s? Okay, so before World War II, at some time, right, and we can tell from the style, it sort of situates in a particular moment. Where do you think it was taken? And by that I mean broadly, what country, what area, what city, what can you guess? Is there anything in the image that can tell us that? America, okay, and why do you say America?
Like the character feels very 20s, like we're 20s style.
Okay. Any other thoughts?
A social gathering.
A social gathering? Why do you say that?
Perhaps she looks very, very nice, and perhaps she's going to go dancing or.
Okay, she looks, that's kind of like, she might be going off to a party, right? She's got, what? Corsage, okay. So right, looks like, okay, well what do you think she does? What do you think her work might be? Or does she work, or what do you think she's doing?
Maybe theater.
What?
Maybe theater.
Theater, okay, and why do you think theater?
Well, again, I think she's out enjoying an evening and so forth, but by what I see, she has talent, and that's why she does what she does in life.
Okay. Well, she certainly kind of commands attention, right? Any other thoughts? Now, let me give you a bit of information. Her name is Melba Yonemuto. What do you think now? Does that change anything about what you think about her? Does it bring up any other questions? Well, then let me turn to another image. This is Melba, circa 1909, St. Louis. Now, what story does this image tell you? Multicultural household. So what you mean specifically multiracial, right? She looks like she's multiracial, right? Because her last name again is Yonemura. And here we can tell, I mean, what are the things that suggest that she might be multiracial to you?
She's wearing Japanese clothing.
Okay.
And the facial features seem Caucasian.
Okay.
So,
Yeah. Any other thoughts about this?
Prosperous family.
Prosperous family. Now, why do you say that?
Just the background and so forth, it's rather ornate and her clothing, she is lacking for a photo.
Mm-hmm.
Her hair is, someone is wanting to show off this cute girl.
Yeah, that's right. Like this is, they're like, here's my kid, and I'm gonna get her super fancied up and take this picture. And this is in a frame. And just because I have to show you the image. The actual photo is about this big. This is it's a large photo in a wooden frame. Still, and this photo was taken in 1909, and the frame remained with it. Okay, well let me give you another little bit of the story. This is Melba. Sorry, I had a little bit of fun with the presentation because I can. Melba, that woman's name is Tilly Hessling. Now, what relationship do you think they have? Any guesses?
Nanny?
Nanny?
Nanny.
Midwife? Anything else?
Teacher?
Teacher? What if I told you it's her grandmother? I bet she would say thank you if she were here. Okay. So that is Melba with her grandmother, circa 1910. Well, I could go on about this family because they're so interesting, but we don't want to spend too much time because I want to move things along. So here's a little bit more about the family. There's Grandma Tilly, not as young. That's Aunt Katie, Melba, and her dad, Tokomatsu. Now, any thoughts about seeing this family photo?
Where's the mother?
Where's the mother? Yeah, where is the mother indeed? So, now at this point, I'm just going to tell you the story because it's such a, so Tokomatsu and Melba's mom, who was Nellie and then at some point changed her name to Camille because she was just odd, met in St. Louis. Tokomatsu came from Kumamoto Prefecture for the St. Louis World's Fair in 1904, and he ended up staying. He met Nellie, who was the daughter of German immigrants. They got married, and they had Melba. Well, then they moved to Chicago. And at some point, Nellie left her husband and daughter, but also her mother and sister. And the mother and sister stayed with the Japanese son-in-law and granddaughter. So the mother is missing from this photo because she left. But her natal family, her mom and sister, actually stayed with their ex-husband. There's many twists and turns. Eventually they make it out to Livingston, and then mom ends up back with the family. Although they don't remarry, she kind of comes back. And that very first photo I showed you was actually Melba's screenshot because her mother tried to get her into film. But Nellie didn't want anybody to know that she had married a Japanese man or that she had a daughter as old as Melba. So she pretended Melba was her sister, called her Melba Dupre, and tried to get her into Hollywood. And that's what that first photo was. So you're absolutely correct. Theater. And she was very striking, right? And unfortunately, there was a Nisei, a Japanese-American man who knew Melba from a different context, who knew that she was Japanese-American. And so that ended Melba's very short-lived attempt at a movie career. Okay, let me just share a couple other images. This is Melba again. Any guesses on where she is here? You just stole the show. Melba, just like every other Japanese American, and this was anybody with, is it 1/16 Japanese American? So if you're great-great-great-great-grandparents, and that included babies in orphanages who clearly, you know, couldn't even walk yet. If you were any part Japanese American, you were subject to the exclusion orders. So Melba, along with her family, and by this point the family had changed around it. If you have stories about Melba later, I'm happy to share them. But I just want to, it's such an interesting photo collection, I just want to highlight a few things. But this is Melba, now much older, in Sansonita. And I just want to share one last photo. Where might this be? So somebody said Manzanar, someone said camp. This is actually, oh, sorry. I didn't, it's Amachi. But you can tell, anyone who said camp, right? It's sort of, you can see kind of back here, there's a row of barracks buildings. But the one thing that tells you it's not Manzanar is that most photos of Manzanar, you can see the mountains behind. Or like if it were Heart Mountain, you see the one mountain. This is pretty barren, and they were in Amachi, which was the camp in Colorado. And I just, you know, so here's Daddy Tokomatsu, Melba, this is her husband George, and Eddie, I don't know who Eggs is, I just love his name. And also, the Japanese American men in particular had some awesome nicknames. My favorite is Nails. I don't know what his real name is, but Nails. There's another guy named Choo Choo. And Eggs. So, and then Wally is her son. This collection is a collection of photos that Wally, the son, donated to the Japanese American National Museum back in about 2003. And it's one of my own personal favorites. Melba was actually on a float in the Rose Parade in 1941. And she had been divorced once and had a son, and yet was still included in the Rose Parade, which was quite an accomplishment at the time. So that's one. So I just wanted to give you one example of how photos, historical photos, you know, when you focus on certain things, can really tell a story, but can also, you know, but it requires our involvement and our engagement with it. It requires us being intelligent, sort of thoughtful consumers of images, right? But we all sort of use images. We're surrounded by images. We live in a time where we all carry around a high-powered camera. But it's important for us to really think about what stories images tell us. Now, another type of artifact or object that can tell stories is a combination of images and documents. So I'm going to switch to another thing. So this isn't, it's kind of might be a little difficult to see, but so this is a page from a scrapbook. Now, what kind of group is pictured here?
They're picking cotton, aren't they?
Huh?
They're picking cotton.
They're picking cotton? Okay. Yeah, they are picking cotton.
Mm-hmm.
What else? Girl Scouts, yeah. So it's Girl Scouts. So apparently Girl Scouts pick cotton. Where are they? Aside from specifically a cotton field. Rower, right? So, I mean, the clue is literally here, but I just want to highlight that. Rower. What is rower? It's one of the camps in Arkansas. And what does that tell you about when this is from? Right, so this is during World War II in Arkansas. Rower, specifically Japanese American incarceration camp. There are Girl Scouts picking cotton. Does that spark some questions in your mind? I mean, it did for me, absolutely, when I saw this. And who are they? They're Girl Scouts. Okay, now I'm going to help out with this because this is kind of hard to see. So, it says Girl Scouts Troop 2, Relocation Center, McGee, Arkansas, which is the place name for rower. What is this? A letter, okay. Here we have, it says, Dear Ruth. It says, your loving sister, Mary Shiraishi. So this is a letter from one sister to another. And I know it's period because they're so like, especially these Japanese American letters from camp, because they're so like World War II era American. You know, it's like, gee, gosh, shucks, and all this kind of stuff. So let me read you what it says. The value of every course in school, every recreation, every task outside of school is to be measured by the way it helps you grow, an ability to enjoy, and an ability to practice self-control. The quotation above, I hope will mean something to you. Here's wishing you the best of luck. Now, this is dated May 15, 1945. Any thoughts about this document?
Where is the sister?
Where's the sister? Okay, yeah, where is the sister? Any other thoughts? Self-control? What is she talking about? Huh?
Encouragement.
Encouragement, okay.
Who are the other signatures?
Who are the other signatures? Yeah, there's a Virginia something, a Kemi something, Judy Saito, various people. Okay, so let's tuck this away in our minds. So far we have a page from a scrapbook of Girl Scouts picking cotton. We have a letter from a sister to another sister. Okay, this is, now I've discovered recently, talking to like college-age people, that cursive is very hard now for people to read, which I find shocking because I still write in cursive. I guess that, see, I obviously graduated in 1999 because I'm old, apparently. So let me help. So at the very top it says Scribe Badge, Rower Relocation Center. Rower Relocation Center is a community like 7 other, what? Similar camps operated by the War Relocation Authority of the Department of Interior, where Americans of Japanese ancestry are living temporarily. It says, why do you think it says 7 other? Does that help you date it at all? Sort of a leading question. So, we started out with 10. There are 10 WRA camps originally. Tule Lake very quickly became a segregation center, so it became a slightly different status. Now, when it says 7 other, that suggests that this is after Jerome closed. Jerome was the first camp to close. It was the other Arkansas camp. So probably this is being written after that point, which is sometime in 44. Okay, so we're looking blah, blah, blah. After having been uprooted from their homes on the West Coast in 1942 to various assembly centers, the present populace came to their community in Arkansas. The present population is around 6,000 people. Rower Relocation Center is situated just outside of the city limits of Rower. It's about 14 miles northeast of McGee. This land was formerly an old cotton patch and woods. Like a boom town, Rower popped up overnight with a maximum population of about 8,000 evacuees. Rower is divided into blocks, 33 of them for the residents. Each block can house a capacity of 150 people. There are 12 barracks, blah, blah, blah. So, this helps to fill in that question about what in the world were they doing with that cotton, right? Are there any other things that this document may bring to mind?
Who is the audience?
Okay, who's the audience? Yeah, why, who is the audience? Any other things?
Who's the writer?
Who's the writer? Okay, yeah. And also it says Scribe Badge, right? So, and this, some of these questions I don't know the actual answers to, I can only speculate. But I'm assuming badge is referring to a Girl Scout badge. That this is in some way in furtherance of getting a Girl Scout badge. And what she chooses to write about. And scribe, that means you're writing things, right? So the content isn't the focus, it's how beautiful your handwriting is, I'm assuming. But what she chooses to write about is rower. And so there we have one other piece of her story. So this is the last thing. my troop badge, scribe badge number 6. And I'm gonna go through this quickly. Sorry, I always go over. What I think about relocation. Evacuation was a big mistake. Yes, it will leave a big blot on American history, but America has come to realize this. She has asked to be forgiven by establishing this huge project. That 10-letter word, so familiar to our ears, relocation. Are we going to forgive her? Relocation permits us to leave the centers and settle down anywhere in the state and live life anew as normal American citizens. It will mean a comfortable home in a city apartment or country bungalow, working in defense plants to help haze a victory, or driving a tractor on a farm producing a vital war essential food. It will mean new friends at school, church, clubs, and other organizations. It will mean no barbed wire fences, no eagle-eyed entities, and what a glorious that will be. Have you forgotten about our Nisei GIs who have just finished a tough but highly commendable job? Have they not thought about simple loves of home sweet home? Soon they will be returning, looking forward to a good hot bath, soft downy beds, comfy chairs. But will they find these luxuries in a relocation center? Scarcely a chance. There's one answer and one which is tops, and that is relocation. And what's more, you may go to any of the 48 states. What a wonderful opportunity to see your country while you do some real work. So why don't you talk it over with your friends, the well-felt workers and relocation advisors today? Why tarry any longer? And that's also part of her Girl Scout. Her says, my troop badge, stripe badge number 6. What does that make you think? How does that make you think? She was angry? Okay. Any?
Rebellious.
Rebellious? Okay.
Frustrated.
Frustrated? I have to say, it gives my heart incredible joy to see like a Nisei young woman say evacuation is a mistake, full stop, right? Like, this is an assertive young woman. I've totally gone over my time, so I'm gonna have to leave, but this is all part of a Girl Scout collection. This helps to tell us a story about Girl Scouts in one of the camps in Lower. And with that, with probably many questions and thoughts in your mind, I'm gonna have to leave here with that. And I'm gonna turn things over to Mary next. Come on, Mary.
Hi. This is Monica. Okay. I want to try and give you a description of what it was like for myself as a third-generation Japanese American growing up in the 1950s. I grew up in Sierra Madre, and this was basically less than 10 years after people had left the camps. So this is the resettlement period. Okay, and so, you know, people's mindset was still that, you know, the Japanese are the enemy, right? And I definitely ran into that when I was a kid, walking home from school. Little boys used to throw rocks at me. They had been watching like John Wayne movies, and it was like, you know, shoot the Jap, right? And so this is, you know, one of those things that you just don't forget. Another thing at the time that kind of describes the way things were politically was that our neighbors across the street actually got a cross burned on their lawn, and they were Jewish. So even at that time, Jewish people had not been accepted as white. Okay. The area that we lived in was very John Burke society heavy. So they were, you know, that was the atmosphere. Also, you know, the end of the war was marked by Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the dropping of the atomic bombs, and the only time it's been done, okay, by this country. And who's to say what effect that actually had on Japanese Americans? You know, I don't really see or read that much about that, but it had to have had some type of silencing effect for the Japanese who were just coming out of camp, going back and trying to resettle in the West Coast. So this also, many businesses would refuse to serve you. I remember going to the market with my mother, and we would be standing at the meat counter and waiting, and after a while she realized, they're not going to serve us. So this is a very common thing for people of my generation that we went through in our childhood. Also, our family was, they tried to petition us out of the neighborhood because they didn't want Japanese living here. So these are, this was the way it was. And so it's in this context that my mother's telling us stories about camp. And she was only 16 years old when she went to camp. And so my first picture that I want to share with you, and I'll be passing this around, is a picture of my mother's family the day before they left for camp. Okay, so when you look at it, you'll see they look very happy. And so, actually going through Emily's guidelines on, what you get out of these objects and stuff, and I had always kind of wondered, and so trying to prepare for this presentation, I really had to, try and wonder why do they look so happy, right? And I went back and I reread a paper that my mother had written for our Asian American Studies class at UCLA back in the 70s. And she had written how my grandfather was actually asked by the city of Pasadena, which is where the family lived, to be a part of the committee along with the Japanese American Citizens League, who was definitely, rah-rah for the camps, and also the American Friends Service Committee, who was also very helpful with the Japanese Americans during that time. And he was actually asked to help with the smooth transition and relocation to the camps. And so this is, I think, why they look happy, is because he himself was very upbeat about camp. Okay, he was working with JCL, and so, and then he was able to find someone who was a neighbor who was going to actually take care of his grocery store while they went to camp. And so he actually had a very kind of upbeat view about going, which shows in the photo. To my horror, actually. I was kind of wondering, well, maybe, if we had a picture of the following day, we might see something different. I don't know. So my sister and I used to pester our mother about, you don't have any sad stories about going to camp or being in camp. And she said the only sad story that she had was the day that they left Pasadena. They were on the train, and she's looking out the window, and she saw her music teacher who had come to the train station to see them off. And she said that was the saddest moment. That's when she felt shame, that they had to leave. But other than that, and especially I think due to her age, when she went to camp, she had a lot of fun. She liked it. And so those are the stories we always heard growing up about camp. This never sat well with me. And so like in junior high and high school, I wrote 2 term papers about the camps. And this is, still is not, it wasn't taught in history classes or anything. The only thing that was ever talked about was the Japs burning Pearl Harbor, right? Remember Pearl Harbor. But you never saw anything about the camps. So, fast So, growing up in the 60s, a very turbulent period in American history. We watched the civil rights struggles going on in the South. Here in LA, we had the Watts riots, the free speech movement in Berkeley, the San Francisco State strike, which brought us ethnic studies, to college campuses, and the anti-war movement. All these things were going on. I was then undergraduate at UCLA, and my mother happened to be working at the UCLA Asian American Studies Center, so I used to hang out there. And I was also an art student, so I was taking photography classes. And and this is right around the time when the early beginnings of the Asian American movement started emerging. The rest of the pictures I have to share are a pilgrimage to Manzanar. I think that it's the second pilgrimage, but I can't find any verification. Like I looked in the Hydra and there was I didn't see the second pilgrimage, I found the first pilgrimage. And I don't think it was the first one that I went to, but I'm not sure. Anyway, one of the early projects the Japanese Americans did take up, beginnings of the Asian American movement, was the repeal of the Title II Internal Security Act of 1950. Okay, now this act still gave the president basically executive choice to set up concentration camps. He had the power to do that. And so the Japanese Americans, they felt very indebted to African Americans for the civil rights movement, okay, and for starting to open the door for the rest of the people of color. And that there were actually rumors going around at the time that the camps were being prepared for black militants. And so this was the climate, and so the first pilgrimage, which this Gidra article talks about, says that it was organized, one, to dramatize the campaign to repeal Title II, and also to restore the monuments that were there and the graves, and also to pay tribute to the attorneys and to the 135 people that actually died there in camp. And so, on this pilgrimage, whether it was the first or the second, sorry, I can't specify, my first impressions getting there, first it was like bitterly cold. It was freezing, This is close, Southern California, but it was still the winter time that we went. It was actually snowing on the way up, so completely desolate. Okay, there's nothing for miles around, And so one of the questions that popped into my mind was like, why do they even need barbed wire? Where are people going to go, right? But, people could find a way. People did find a way, because there are a lot of people who would sneak out of camp and go mountain climbing, because the mountains are right there. So Manzanar is like, 210 miles from LA, and it's like a 3.5 to 4 hour drive. We saw dishes that were still partially just covered by the dirt, just lying there in a ditch. And so our task, as soon as we got there, was to actually clean up tumbleweed, dead wood. The monument was painted. And so during that whole work period, I didn't take any pictures because I was working. I was being good. And the monument, so this is the monument. And so they painted the monument because it was, you know, it's out of the elements, you know, all year long with no upkeep. So it definitely needed something. Now the characters on the monument read, "The monument to console the souls of the dead." Okay, so those are committed to the people who died at Manzanar. And on the back of it is August 1943, erected by Manzanar Japanese. So this was erected while people were still there interned. So these are, most of these pictures are, they hand the flowers out to everybody, and everybody stood in line and when it was their turn, would place a flower on the monument. And so that's what all these pictures are, people waiting in line to place a flower on the monument. So it was a very kind of somber occasion. I just want to say in closing that what the 1970s Asian American movement did was it really heightened the awareness among our parents and our community. I used to struggle and argue with my parents to tell them this was wrong. What happened to them was wrong. I mean, whether they have fun or not, whatever, but you know, the government did not have the right to do this. And so, you know, it took a lot of arguing with them for them to finally come around. And I imagine that this was happening in a lot of different households at the time, of kids trying to, you know, get their parents to see it from another point of view, because they were just the victims and they had a victimized mentality. You know, they had just accepted it and they were just trying to resettle and move on with their lives. It was because of the movement that, you know, Manzanar got recognized as a California historic site, and also, you know, helped break the silence of the shell-shocked people, the East End and the East End. And it definitely, I think, set in motion people actually participating in the reparations hearings by the Commission on Wartime Internment and Relocation of Civilians. So my mother's family, they were actually at Gila. My father's family was at Manzanar. And they were actually supposed to go to Hard Mountain. And my grandfather, who was very wealthy and had a lot of plants, he donated 1,000 cherry trees to Manzanar. They had a cherry park, which I found this out years later. Actually, a park ranger told my son about it. But he donated his cherry trees to Manzanar, and that enabled him to move the family to Manzanar instead of Hard Mountain. So that's my story.
I need to sign in here, or see if we're other users. Oh, okay, thanks. Cool, thank you. You can tell that totally Windows useless. But thanks for inviting me. This is a really cool event. I don't get to do this very often, so it's an honor to be here at Claremont College is where I grew up like in Disneyland, and I listened to K-Space. It really informed my punk rockness. I went to shows at Green Door, and I shopped at Rhino, and I still go to Donut Man to this day. So it's great to have an excuse to come out here. Let's see. All right, there we go. So the story I'm sharing today actually involves two artifacts. I brought a skateboard. So there's one of these outside somewhere that's like in a video, Renee's video, I think, right? But this is the one that I wrote with Eric, because we went together to write the article. And so there's this, I broke it out of the shed. It's not behind glass at home or anything. It's just sitting around, and sometimes when we have boxes to move around, we'll use it for $1. If you want, you can ride around on it outside. It looks like there's a good little slope. It isn't precious. And then the other artifact I brought is the magazine. And it's funny that magazines are artifacts now, but they are. And I feel like, social media posts and web pages, they come and go, but this is forever. It's gonna sit on a coffee table or on a bookshelf, and my 11-year-old daughter can skim through it, and it's just as real as it was when it came out on the newsstands. So you can check this out too, if you don't have brownie crumbs on your hand. This one is precious. So anyway, two relics that we'll talk about today. And there's the issue. You can kind of tell that's the Stone Ages, 1994, when she was going to college still.
I was in high school.
High school. Yeah, when I was young and good looking. So back then, Eric and I kind of came from a punk rock fanzine background. We both, he took pictures and I wrote articles for things like Flipside and Ink Disease. And we wanted to write about Asian stuff. So we had that aesthetic of cut and paste and photocopy and doing it yourself. That's what DIY is, by the way. But there's all this stuff that was going on that no one was writing about. I don't know why they would, actually. But Japanese robot toys before eBay or Garage Rock from Japan that couldn't be streamed on the internet back then. Hong Kong action movies were going off because Choi Hawk and John Woo going out of their minds. You had to go to the San Gabriel Valley, though, right, to see those at the Garfield or Kowa. Asian skateboarders like Bones Brigade Steve Caballero or Dogtown's Peggy Oki. Asian snacks before food culture. Hello Kitty was even exotic back then. Believe it or not, there were people out there who didn't even know. That's me, by the way, inside that. I thought it would be cool to get a job at a Sanrio store and wear that and weave that into the story. So I'm very proud of that still. And the magazine took off pretty fast. So the first two issues, as you can see, were stapled and folded, photocopied zines, but we got distribution and Tower Records picked us up, Barnes & Noble picked us up, and before we knew it, we were on real newsstands right next to pornography. Sports Illustrated, Time Magazine, all those things. And we had a pretty good ride. And those first issues, I don't know if you can tell, but there's stuff like the Boredoms, that's a Japanese noise band, Twinkies, you know what that is. That's people that are yellow on the outside and white on the inside. So there's a little bit of Asian American studies going on, I guess. I already explained Hello Kitty. Oh, eye operations, you can barely read that on the... And it's funny, because I'm wearing the Hello Kitty head, and the eyes are really big, right? And then we're writing about eye jobs. And the funny thing is that I actually became this expert on eye jobs. I was on 4 talk shows. I was on Dr. Phil, Tyler was the one that started it all, and then there was the CNN thing also. And the thing is, people would look for experts, to talk about eye jobs and how it was really hard to find people that would say anything bad about it. Because I think people didn't want to seem rude or inconsiderate towards the people who got them. Anyway, I was going to do it. I said, yeah, maybe they're not intending to, but yeah, the message you're giving is that the way you're born isn't good enough. It doesn't look as good. Yeah, you look great with that eye job, but you have to fess up and own it, that that's the message you're sending. That you didn't like how you look when you're born. You just got to live with that, But I don't know. Look at K-pop, so maybe I'm wrong. So anyway, those were the first issues. And I totally remember when we came up with the idea of a return to Manzanar. This is the first spread. That's me. You've seen a lot of beautiful photos of that memorial. This is the only one where someone's defiling it. But it was for a reason, right? I totally remember being in Eric's bedroom that day, and we're like, man, we need to fill some pages. And we already had Michelle Yeoh in that issue. We had this Brazilian vert skater, Lincoln Ueda. We had Asian liquor reviews. The thing is, neither Eric nor I drank. So his girlfriend did though, and so did her buddy. So they just got like bags full of booze and just drank. And you can, if you look in here, like they give thumbs up and thumbs down. Way before foodie culture though. And I suggested, a Manzanar trip because I had driven by it a zillion times going to Mammoth. And back then, it was just a bunch of dirt paths leading to a marker here and there. Of course, that was there. And Eric was into it. He never drove up the 395 to Mammoth like I did, but he was in Asian American studies, so he kind of understood that it was something that we should do. And we went for it, But we thought, how can we do this in a way that's cool? Because he was an Asian American studies major, so he knew how boring it was. He knew that every single student hears about it over and over again. He probably knew that when JANM existed, they'd have that luggage there for decades. And they'd have to think about ways to get young people to go. So we're like, what can we do to make it cool? And we did cover skateboarders from the very beginning, and Thrasher. And we had buddies who made skate videos. Anyway, so we're like, yeah, well maybe we should get those off-road wheels, and we found some. And we got them, and we went out, and we woke up at dawn, much like many of you will. And we went to Manzanar. Here's more of it. It was cool. I mean, it wasn't, you look at the pictures and you think, wow, that was a real X Games moment or something. But it wasn't. It was mostly lugging around these super heavy boards through the dirt. And it's freezing out there, as you all know. And there's bugs, and you get itchy. So dry as well as cold. And we just looked around and just tried to find whatever we could. We took there's not a lot to look at back then. There was no museum. So we just looked for graffiti. We found a pretty cool aqueduct, as well as the paths that led to it. Those were skatable, actually. Barely. Couldn't really do anything cool, but it's just so depressing out there that, to be out, it's like being on the moon, especially when you're rolling around on that. So I was really proud of the article we had, and the issue finally came out, and it was kind of a big deal. And I remember getting a letter from Sue Embry, who I interviewed for a sidebar, so I already knew about her doing the pilgrimages back then. And she hated the article. And she said, this is terrible. Now people are going to go out there and vandalize the place, and they're going to ruin this really important historical place. And I wrote a really kind letter back saying, thanks for writing, and actually we're trying to do the same thing as you, just reach new people, and no one's actually going to go out there. It's too far, too cold, too gross, and you can't even do anything cool. It's just, all you can do is roll around and do some kick turns. So it'll probably be okay, but in the end, we're doing the same thing as you, trying to find a new angle to get more people to know about it and talk about this very important place. And then later on, I was interviewing Art Ishii and Guy Kurose. Some of you probably know those folks. They were part of the Yellow Brotherhood, right? And I met them at the Silverlight Coffee, and sure enough, there was Sue hanging out with friends. It was really awkward, because I just got that letter, and this isn't like email where people respond, the next day. And she's like, oh, that's you. And she said, and then she introduced me to her friends as this guy who wrote a really cool article. So that made me really happy. And then later on, Margaret Cho mentioned the article in the LA Times. I don't know if that was quoted somewhere in one of the propaganda pieces. But she said, oh, Eric and I, we went to the concentration camp, and we skateboarded there, and we reclaimed it. So punk rock, and that was like a really cool quote. And looking back, that was pretty cool to do that. I think that it was a real turning point for us, because we were really into, gangster movies and kung fu movies and toys and anime, and I don't know, a lot of superficial stuff. And to mix in a trip to Manzanar, we went to Locke, like the next issue, I think. I don't know if you knew that little town near Sacramento, by the Delta. It was like a really early Japanese town up there. We went to like rice fields and interviewed people. Then we had the whole Yellow Power issue with Lilu Lee and Guy and Art and Scott Louis, all these different activists. Mona Shida, I still see him around in Chinatown. And to have those sorts of people mixed in with the same issues. We had Chow Yun-fat and Maggie Chung, actors. We had Money Mark, who was playing with the Beastie Boys at the time. We had supermodel Jenny Shimizu. And to put, Asian activists in the same breath as those was really important and cool to us to show that, we're not your novelty dolls. We're not, on one hand, all the cool cultures coming from Asia, but also, Asian American activists are important. And then when I look at Mary's photos, I'm like, look how cool they look too. Of course they were in there. They all look so cool. They could, like today they look cool when you look at it. And here's, this is me and my daughter, like last time we went to Mammoth. I'm wearing a Channel 3 shirt. That's a punk band that sings a song called Manzanar, actually. The guy, Mike McGran, his grandma was Japanese and she was in one of the camps. So those are like my favorite things. We got punk rock from the 70s and 80s, Posh Boy Band that was on the Rodney on the Rock compilations. And activism, Asian American pride, and it's all of my favorite things mixed up in one. So, we've gone back a couple times. We got to the museum, I've taken my daughter there, and I'm still on schedule here. And it's really cool, though, to be invited here and talk about artifacts like the skateboard, which has been sitting in our house, and Eloise has rolled around on it. We never told her about this trip. I guess I should. I'll pull out these magazines, and now she's 11. She's old enough to read this stuff. So I'm really excited about sharing all these stories with her now, because there's some cuss words and some gross people in there, but I think she can handle it. I love taking her to Stephen Chow movies now, and we go to Jana, and art openings and book releases. And I love that storytelling and artifacts are being examined here, especially in this age of Marie Kondo, where people are like throwing away stuff. So Wendy, my wife, is here, and she's seeing that. Oh, good thing we didn't get rid of that skateboard. Nothing's important. All these magazines, none of them are digitized, so we can't throw them away. Half of them are her work, because, the last 50 issues, she was the graphic designer. And Kate here was like behind the scenes for everything too. So it's cool to get back together with friends who helped make these magazines. And and to hear that people, people are still studying Manzanar even though it's old and crusty. And it's echoes, but it's really important to keep them going. And I still write, even though the magazine ran its course, a little bit online, and I do a decent amount of activism in Chinatown these days, where my grandparents, found a home, and my in-laws. And I just encourage all of you who are interested in, studying and research, but also just, keeping your own artifacts and thinking about what they mean and passing them on to your friends and family. Because all of us make culture. It's not something that you buy at the store or read about in a book. Every decision you make, everything you do, all the stuff you choose to do with your life, you're building onto this tradition and the story. So you should feel like you're someone who's making the story, not someone who's just studying it or buying it. And I think just being here, being interested in it, is really cool. And if we don't meet online at the usual places, we should hang out after this talk. So, thank you.
Martin brought up Marie Kondo. I just wanted to say something that, I also write a blog, and I wrote something about cultural appropriation Marie Kondo recently that was a big hit with my Asian studies nerd friends. But one of the things that has brought up and has made me think about, especially because I spent a lot of my professional career going through the objects that belong to people who at some point in time lost everything. That things aren't always disposable, and things are, and sometimes we're torn away from our things. You know, I've been interviewing a lot of 89, 90, even 94-year-olds in the last few months, and I've been trying to ask them, you know, when you were 13 and after Pearl Harbor, when you were forced to go to these camps, what did you take with you as a 13-year-old? And most of them had no role in packing things up because their parents took care of that. When you think about how that, they lived 13 years. You know, I mean, I had lots of things as a child. I had a super messy room. But you still have attachments and things that you love. And to lose all of that at 13, and for a lot of these families, even if they've stored things, left them with neighbors or stored them at a local church, a lot of times these storage facilities were vandalized. Some were even burned down. Things that they had tried to store and hold on to, many of them were lost. And that, you know, now that for those of us, for as many of us as there are who have the luxury of having too much, I think that it's really important to think about how things really do reflect certain things about us, how they tell stories. And I know from my own experience working at the museum, I have such a deep love for the stories that objects can tell. And one of the reasons why I went into academia, I was a professor of Japanese history for a few years and have returned to the museum world because I prefer work that looks at not just documents and primary sources as storytellers, but also recognizes lives and community and objects as teller of stories. So enough from me. We want to open this up. You know, we have here two people who have been directly engaged in recording and sharing and creating community stories, and you know, this is your opportunity to ask questions or to share your own stories. So I'd like to open this time up. And please feel free to share or ask questions. So, and try to speak loudly so everyone can hear. But we'll repeat questions so everybody can hear. So, go ahead.
I was at the Japanese American Museum downtown a number of years ago when the internment camp, you know, the unit is still there. It was incredible to be in, not in a good way, but to be in that environment and to talk about an object
Yeah.
to look at and be in. And so it's very important. I'm relating it to architectural spaces like downtown now where we're erasing history, and they took that out, they rebuilt the museum, but it's all cynical, and we lose an aspect of our lives when those relics aren't there anymore.
The barracks is inside the museum, in the second floor. So, yeah, so you saw it when it was outside.
Yeah.
So for those of you who don't, how many of you have been to the Japanese American National Museum? Okay, so it's in downtown LA, it's in Little Tokyo, but back in the day, when I was still in college, when Martin was still in college, it was just they used the old Nishihonganji Buddhist temple space as the museum space, and then across the street, or across the way from the plaza, they had brought down barracks from Heart Mountain, one of the camp in Wyoming. It had been taken apart piece by piece, then reassembled, and then rebuilt on this lot.
It was very powerful.
Yeah, and I wish I would have seen, because I actually never saw it in that state. Well, they built a new pavilion in the same space where that was, but they designed the upstairs gallery space so that you could fit the barracks in there. And it has remained empty on the inside. Volunteers often want us to put furniture and things, but we want people to see it, to treat it as an object, an important artifact. We always say that it is our most important and biggest artifact. And it is, you know, I see it all the time, and yet it's still, it carries its ghost, you know. So if you ever have a chance, please go check it out. But yeah, thank you, and please come back and see it again. It's not the same because it's not. They had to like do a smaller section, but it's back. So yeah, yes.
I want to thank you, Mary, for some of your memories because we're the same generation. I was born in Poston Camp, so my parents told me stories about being there and what it was like to be there and travel across country to Des Moines, which is where they went in 1944. They got out a little bit early. And the memories that you have echo my own life, so it was a generational thing, and I appreciated your sharing. Thank you for that. And I wanted to say, I brought an object to share. This is a book. My grandfather, Yusuke Takayanagi, was incarcerated at Manzanar, and he was an artist. And while he was there, he made all of these paintings of Manzanar. So I just thought it'd be kind of fun to look at, from an artist's point of view, what Manzanar looked like while he was there. So this is just for sharing.
Yeah, thank you. Do you want to pass it around?
Can I pass it
Would that be
around?
okay?
Yes.
Yeah.
Be gentle, no brownie crown.
Yeah. Everybody make sure your hands are clean. Other questions?
Do you also want to mention the poster that you brought?
Oh, yes. I visited my birthplace, which is Poston, which is a camp just across the river from Blythe. It's in Arizona on the Colorado River Indian Tribes Reservation land. And the CRIT, Colorado River Indian Tribes, has a tribal museum in Parker, Arizona. So I went to visit this tribal museum, and there in the corner of the museum is a dedication to the Poston camp. And on the wall was a black and white poster of all 10 camps, and pictures of all 10 camps and names of all 10 camps. And they gave me that poster when they found out I was from Poston. They gave me that poster, which was a very touching gesture on their part, I thought. And that poster I had given today to Claremont, where's Colette? Colette has it. And,
I think Carrie's not now.
oh, Carrie, yes. So it belongs here at Claremont now.
Can you tell us about your photos? Like, what did you use?
Oh.
Did you have a darkroom? Did you do all the developing yourself?
Oh, I used to go down to Vizra and Darkroom, so that's where I spent a lot of my time. But I wanted to follow up with Ruth about the connection between these camps and the Native Americans and the reservations. A lot of them were put on their land. And the guy that was actually head of, he was like kind of one of the people in charge of the relocation camps, he had come out of the Bureau of Indian Affairs.
Dylan S. Myers, who's
Yeah.
the second director of the WRA.
So there's all this overlap, right, which is really pretty interesting. You know, that's why that poster was really something.
I remember interviewing someone. There was a sidebar about Manzanar and how, first the Native Americans were displaced, and then there were farmers, and then when the water was moved out to LA, how they were displaced. And then Japanese Americans are moved in, forced in there, and how there's all these different levels of shittiness, happening. And we talked too much about whether or not it was haunted by their spirits, and we should have been talking about social justice in the article. But it is a really heavy place, because it used to be very beautiful. Apple.
Well, then Manzanar in Spanish means what, orange?
Apples.
Apple.
There was apple. Yeah, there were apple groves out there
Orchard.
before, Mulholland and everyone, all the water got sent down here.
Yeah.
They're trying to bring back those apples. That's one of the things that the Park Service is doing there. I've gone to a number of the pilgrimages, and the last one we walked in the apple orchards where they're bringing them back.
At Manzanar?
Yes.
Yes. Yeah, I've been to Manzanar once, but it was before the interpretive center. So I saw what you saw. Yeah. And actually, I just wanted to add one more thing about the monument, because it's come up in both things. So that monument was built at Manzanar, and there's actually those sorts of memorial monuments at a number of the camps. But one thing to point out is that in Japanese culture, what happens after you're dead is a very important thing. There's a word for those spirits that don't have people to look after them called muenbokoke. In fact, my mother, who's Japanese in Japan, has already paid the temple to take care of her remains after she dies because she doesn't trust me to do it. And she's not wrong. I mean, let's face it. But, so I think that, the fact that they built this monument anxiety of, you know, we don't know where we're going, we don't know where we're going to go back to, but if we lose some of our community here, those spirits have to be cared for. So they collected money, and this is something that Duncan Williams goes into in quite a lot of detail in his new book. Is it American Soup? He wrote a book on Buddhism and camp. I'm a historian, I'm terrible with book titles. But it's an incredibly moving story about how they wanted to make sure that those spirits would be cared for. And that's one of the things that has happened through the pilgrimages is an annual, they do a memorial service, and it's an interfaith service that, you know, representatives of different groups go, because what you do with the spirits of the departed is it's a source of existential crisis for a lot of Japanese people. And so, you know, that has become in many ways the focal point for how people have remembered, or sort of the thing that prompted people to return is actually also very poignant. It's, you know, it draws people in, and I'm glad that it does. It's a way of remembering those people.
Yeah, just to follow up on that, I did a little bit of research because the question came up was, are people still buried there? And I found that most of the people have come for those remains of family members and moved them. Because I know in Japan, they always bury their people close to where you live. They're still part of your life, you know. And so, you know, most of those remains have been removed. But I think they say there's like 6 graves left.
And if you haven't been there yet, there's the main cemetery, but then there's like a children's one next to it, and a pet one on the other side. So it's pretty amazing. And there's always little dolls, and always offerings, ramen packs. You know, we see like either just the bricks and then the flavor packets right on top of it. It's pretty amazing. One thing I wish they would do, and this would be really good for the museum, is if they opened a snack shop. Because you're driving, it's in the middle of Independence and Lone Pine, right?
Yeah.
And people usually stop on the way back from Mammoth or wherever, June Lake. And they have really clean bathrooms, which everyone loves, out in the middle of nowhere. And they should have Masupi or something. It'd be so easy for the road.
Oh my God.
People would stop there every time, I think.
Any other questions? Yeah. Yes, there's one other camp. So the question is, were there other camps in California? Tule Lake, which is right at the California-Oregon border, is the second California camp. And what happened with Tule Lake was that fairly early on in 1943, they decided to issue what's been informally called the loyalty questionnaire. It was initially to have sort of a screening process for people who might go into the military service, but also to pre-screen people who would be applying for early release. And this questionnaire caused a lot of tumult all over because if you look at the whole questionnaire, which I'm sure you can find online, it asks really intrusive questions, but they're questions I think we're all kind of aware of now. It's like, what magazines do you subscribe to? What clubs are you a member of? But the 2 questions that became the biggest issue are 27 and 28. One asked if you'd be willing to serve in the U.S. military. The second one asked if you forswore allegiance to the Japanese emperor. And the problem with this was, for one, some people, especially initially they just had that. They didn't even have a separate one for women, so they're like, what do I do with this? I don't know. And other people resented being asked to serve in the U.S. Army when they had just been forced from their homes, lost everything, and were stuck behind barbed wire involuntarily. The second question, especially, so for Japanese immigrants, they were not allowed to become naturalized U.S. citizens. Until the 50s, if you were not white, you couldn't apply for U.S. citizenship. So even if they lived in America 50 years, if they'd been born in Japan, they were still Japanese, so they were afraid that by saying, yes, I forswear allegiance, they would be without any citizenship. For a lot of the Japanese Americans who were U.S. citizens, they were afraid that by saying, yes, I'll forswear, it might be a trick question and would be taken as an acknowledgement they had at one point sworn allegiance. So there was a lot of upset and anger and resentment, and through the course of this period where people were made to answer these questions, there are people who answered no and no to those 2 questions, who were then segregated from the other populations, and Tule Lake had the largest number of those. So So what they did was they did what I call the switcheroo of populations. So everyone in Tule Lake who had not answered no were redistributed to the other 9 camps, and everyone in those 9 camps who'd answered no were shipped to Tule Lake, and it became the largest of the camps. And Tule Lake became an incredible mess, and all the worst things that happened in all the camps all happened in Tule Lake. If you would like to know more, Mitchie Wetland's book, Years of Infamy, goes in a lot of detail on that. But so that was the second camp. But Manzanar is the one. Manzanar is the most accessible. It's the closest to any metropolitan area. So yeah.
I'd always heard about the no-no boys. I always wondered what the no-no girls were.
Well, there were, you could be, so the other thing, just to bring this up, there's a lot of confusion about the term no-no boy, partly because of the novel by John Okada called No-No Boy, which is not actually about a no-no boy at all, it's actually about a draft resistor. So no-nos refers to the people who answered no and no to the loyalty questionnaire and went to Tule Lake. And draft resistors, who sometimes are mistakenly called no-no boys but are separate. So initially the U.S. military asked for volunteers for the Army, who were mostly in the 442 Regimental Combat Team, some of the Military Intelligence Service. Eventually they decided to draft people out of camp. So still the families were stuck there, but they started drafting people. And in different camps, especially Heart Mountain, had a very organized sort of draft resistance movement, where they basically said, we are stuck here, I will happily fight for my country as soon as you let my family out of camp, but until you do, screw you guys. And if you want to learn more about that, there's a great website, Conscience and the Constitution, about the Heart Mountain draft resistors. It includes digitized versions of their different treatises, which are amazing. But they were all arrested for not complying with the draft and were sent to prison. In fact, I just interviewed, I think he might be the last living one. Tako Shizaki was 94 years old, and who shared his own reasoning. He just thought it was unreasonable. Didn't talk to anybody, but just quietly refused to comply and ended up in prison in McNeil Island in Washington for 2 years. Longer than I think he was let out in 1946, so after the war ended.
Okay, maybe we can continue this conversation over some food, and we can, maybe if you are very nice to Martin, we'll let you ride his skateboard. But anyway, please help me thank our facilitators.
Please give Mary